Hi, it's Graham Healy from Rise Up Australia Brisbane 2025 and riseupaustraliabrisbane.com. This subject, you can see in the back of on the backdrop there, Jihad by Stealth, Warning for Australia. And that's based on a book by Pastor Daniel Nyala, The 21st Century Culture War in the West. Now, I was a Senate candidate for 2019 and I ran with Rise Up Australia. Pastor Daniel Nyala was the president and he lived in the Middle East. Believe you me, he knows more about the Middle East than I'd say 100% of the politicians in Australia now in 2025. So he understands what the real challenges are with the invasion of Islam. Now, there's a link, I'll put a link to one of my pages where, basically we've got some definitions there from Pray to You so that you can actually see the reality of the so-called religion of peace, very far from it. But here's a few, I won't make this long, you can go on all night about it, but when you have a look at the terrorism that is happening in the world today, when you add it all up, 95% of it is religiously motivated terrorism, and it's from the Muslim community. Some say the fanatical Muslim community, but you've got to study the Quran to realise that when I say there, that means everyone who is under the banner of the Muslim faith. Their objective is to actually take over the world. So, and that ideology accordingly to subject everyone underneath it. In other words, the old death to infidels is written in their Quran. So, be very careful. Now, when I say this, I'm not saying this to, Muslim citizens who are under the Australian Constitution, who haven't got any hidden agendas, who haven't got any connections to jihad, who haven't got any connections to the Middle East, like Gaza and all those places where they're supporting terrorism. In other words, supporting people who murder people in the most vicious and criminal way. People these days, especially the left, all the transgenders and, the rainbow warriors, all those characters, they seem to draw to agree with jihadism. Isn't that strange? I'll explain that in a second, and we won't go on too long with this because I'll keep it brief. I'll just read some points. We did these in about 2019 with Daniel Nyala, but the thing is that it's now become worse. So it's sort of, in a way, I think it's well worth repeating. What would it mean to have Sharia law practice in this country, Australia? Now, rest assured, when the Muslim community remain under 5%, you're not going to have any problems. But when they get up to about that 10% mark, next minute, they want Sharia law, and most people haven't got a clue what that is. Basically, it's like an Old Testament law, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. That's basically bringing, a medieval law from thousands of years ago, 8,000 years ago or more, into the present world, and just as nasty. So Sharia law belongs to the Islamic culture. I'll read these points out. You can read them on this link that I give you, which is a culture, religion, and law. They do not separate one from the other. I'll read that again. Sharia law belongs to the Islamic culture, which is all culture, religion, and law. They don't separate religion from law. It's the same thing. This is what the West doesn't understand. No wearing of Western clothing. You just go to look at Iran and all that when the Ayatollahs took over, or Lebanon, those places in the Middle East. Women must wear the hijab. Recently, Senator Pauline Hanson shocked everyone by wearing a hijab. Well, that is compulsory in Islam. You will not. That's what they wear. They control women. Women are a lower entity than the men. No drinking of alcohol. Well, I don't disagree with that. No socialising between single and unmarried men and women in public. right? They get very nasty on that, by the way. A woman's testimony is deemed only to be half that of a man. There's all your feminists out the door, but they'll support um, Muslims. A female genitalia mutilation is practiced. That's part of the deal. The death penalty will be introduced. Uh, death penalties in the Middle East is Daniel Nalla, for instance, saw 2 beheadings when he was over in the Middle East, Public stoning to death as a punishment for breaking the law, such as unfaithfulness in a marriage. And, I could go on about that, but they run their own little laws and there's no justice in it, I'll tell you now. Public lashings for menial offence. Someone steals a loaf of bread and they get whipped in public, and so much more. In short, there is no equal rights. There is no freedom of thought or religion. Western culture is forbidden. United Nations human rights laws will not be observed. Now, that's the hard reality. You can read more about this, and on that page that I've got, which I wrote this 2019, you've got what's the name of the guy again? He's a Professor Bill Warner in the United States, who writes about political Islam. Believe you me, it's like the new mayor of New York. Political Islam will take positions in lower positions and work their way up eventually into the Senate like they've done here in Australia. And they're running the jihad by stealth agenda, step by step, inch by inch, until you get to the situation like in London. It's a mess. So, in the Middle East, like for instance, the refugees from Gaza, no one in the Middle East will take them. The other Muslims know they're trouble. Right? They know that they're seeded with Hamas and all this. So none of their neighbours will have anything to do with them. As a matter of fact, Egypt has these great big walls like Donald Trump put up, stopping anyone from Gaza getting into Egypt. Right? Now, you've got to think about that, haven't you? And then fools like the village idiot Albanese bring jihad brides and so-called refugees, from Gaza to Australia. Now, no way of screening those people. And then you've got the fools who are marching across Sydney Harbour Bridge with, free Palestine flags. They got no idea what they're doing. The reality is they've become, by default, a propaganda arm for the jihadists, basically, especially Hamas. So, and I hear this comment all the time, do you believe in genocide of children? I mean, what the hell are these people talking about? The thing is, when there's a war going on, be it World War One, World War Two, any war that you can possibly imagine, there are casualties. Now, it is a known fact that Muslims, in these radical Muslims, they don't care about people being killed, including their own. Like after the Gaza, there was a bit of peace deal brokered in Gaza. Next minute, the Hamas are executing people in the street. That's all right according to the rainbow culture. That's all right according to, the likes of the village idiot Albanese et al. You see the mentality, and I'll just leave it on this because I don't want to carry on too long with this. Now, why does the left, the radical left, who usually is quite violent actually, when I'm talking either USA politics or Australia, all the violent ones are the radical left because they haven't got a brain to bless themselves with. They're actually like control puppets. Whereas I won't say all of the conservative side, but, the common sense side can see it for what it is, and they look at things objectively. Now, when you look at things objectively, you can see the reality. Most of the terrorism in the world is committed by Islam. Look what's happening in Nigeria right now as we speak. And, I've brought people over from Nigeria. Literally, they're murdering Christians by the hundreds of thousands in Nigeria. So why isn't there marches across Sydney Harbour Bridge about that? You see, the whole Free Palestine thing, and I've written about this on the website. You can read more data in that. What it is, it's a spiritual war, and it's a spiritual war of good versus evil. Good being the Christians, and evil being the Muslims. It's as simple as that. So, am I saying all Muslims are evil? Well, I'm not saying that, but I'll say this much. By their fruit, you will determine who they are. Anyone can talk up oh, yes, I'm a good citizen or whatever. Yeah, okay, right. Well, let's see what you do. And the other big question to ask with any, Muslim citizen especially, do you believe in Sharia law? You'll never get a true answer from that. And remember that Muslims can lie to the infidels without a problem. And that's part written in the Quran. So you want to really, really look at the ramifications of jihad by stealth, the warning for Australia. So I'm warning Australia right now. This is what we've got to do. Number one, we've got to stop all immigration from the Middle East now. Number two, any problems here in Australia, be it like what happened recently in Sydney after the slaughter of the Jews on, October 2023, 7th of October 2023, any of those people, and we saw them on television, that were celebrating the slaughtering of Jews in the street should be deported immediately. Deported immediately. Not allowed to continue. This is just insane. This is Australia. This has got nothing to do with jihadism. It shouldn't be promoted, which it was. It shouldn't be allowed to march across Sydney Harbour Bridge or any other place in Australia. And anyone who has ties or links to terrorism should be deported immediately. This is Australia. It isn't. Should be a country of peace, not importing terrorism into this country, such as especially the Labor government. I mean, the Liberals haven't been much better, but, at least they're a little bit, they've got a little bit of a nous in them. Well, the new Liberals will have. Okay, I'll leave it at that. So, am I against every Muslim in Australia? No, I'm not. But you don't know what hidden agendas are running on there. So the bottom line is you have a look and see what the fruit is. Now, already we've seen the fruit of the Free Palestine marches with holding up signs of Ayatollah Khomeini and holding up flags of jihadism. That should be immediately deported. Anyone on those videos should be, the federal police should be over there the next day, packing their bags, sending them back to wherever they come from. And then as far as crime in Victoria, these various so-called youth running around with machetes, bang, jailed immediately and then deported if necessary. These have been repeat offenders. So we don't want those crimes in the street. And the weakest water, Labor and Greens politicians ignore it. Why? Because they got the same spirit. Their spirit is power at any cost. Communism doesn't care, right? So we are going to go through a transformation in Australia, and those people from the Middle East that are called Australia home, number one, they honour the Australian flag. Number two, they honour the Australian Constitution. And I've spoken to many people from the Middle East who agree, totally agree. I've spoken to people from Lebanon. I've spoken to people from various other, I'm just trying to remember the exact areas there in the Middle East, from Israel. I've spoken to people from Iran and those citizens that are here, and they all say they don't want anything to do with these demonstrations across the Sydney Harbour Bridge. And I remember talking to one guy, he was an Uber driver from Iran, and he said he come to this country 20 years ago so his kids would have a future, because they were subject to all the Ayatollahs, right? He said that they got no future over there. So he told me, he said that if anyone disrespects the Australian flag or burns a flag or whatever, they should be deported immediately. He understands that. And a lot of Muslim people that are here for the right reasons, to escape the clutches of radical Islam, or even fundamental Islam, if you want to call it that. But the trouble is, we've now got the radical Islam here in Australia. So we've got to do something about it. The first step is to stop all migration, especially from third world countries, just like Donald Trump has announced. And secondly, we go through all the data and see who's aligned to any terrorist organisations, and we deport them. Simple as that. Mass deportation. Send them back to where they're happy, happy to kill each other, but not happy to allow them to fester and breed here under a so-called democracy. And then the other thing that we've got to do in Australia is introduce referendum on free speech, freedom of religion, provided that religion is peaceful and that religion doesn't have in its dictates to death to infidels and Sharia law and all the rest of it. So you've got to be very careful to understand that they're in the world of Islam, they do not differentiate between the religious law and their political law, same thing. So that is why in the UK especially, that they've now got Sharia courts in London, for instance, a separate court system. So they're creating a subculture that is, when it gets big enough, beyond the 10%, they'll take over. Not going to happen in Australia, is it, folks? Okay, that's Graham Healy over and out. Have a look at the links and just educate yourself a little bit, because there's a lot in this. And it's not what the media says. There's a lot of in-depth stuff, and there's a lot of what we call jihad by stealth. In other words, white-handing the current culture. It's just like I said here, Islam is really a Trojan horse, and we've got to be very careful. There are genuine people who've come from, Islamic countries that want to make Australia home, and that's fair enough. But then there's the other types, and they're already here, as we already know. Albanese importing jihad brides, for instance. I mean, this is, Albanese, you're finished. You are a traitor to Australia. You disgust me, and you disgust any decent Australian. You are not only a communist, but you're a jihad supporter. And fair dinkum, you're good as gone. That's my message. Graham Healy, over and out.